So it really culminated to me passing out in my apartment one day. I was alone, home alone, studying for an exam, and I just passed out. But that day was so eye-opening. It was the first day in probably 2 years I wasn't dizzy. Like, I literally could see straight. It's funny because I joke around now that I got a brain tumor for my 21st birthday because I got the MRI on my birthday. So truly, I can't complain because I don't know another diet that could supersede what the carnivore diet does. It was substantially easier. I was putting so few hours in. I remember I was thinking to myself, I was like, why do I have all this extra time? And I was like, because it was taking me like 5 hours to do what I can now do in 1 hour as far as getting my schoolwork done.
Okay, we've got Chloe. Chloe, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Welcome. It's good to have you, Chloe. Where are you? I see palm trees behind you. I'm not sure if that's a real screen, but where?
I am in Orlando, Florida.
You're in Orlando, so I think are there palm trees in Orlando? I'm not sure. There might be.
Yep.
I know in Miami and other parts they have them, and I think I might be going to Orlando in November for a little conference. But anyway, good to have you here. I guess you've got a success story for us today, so I guess we'll just get started. Maybe you can just give us a little bit about your background, that type of stuff, and then we can get into that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I guess I'll start out with way back in college. So I studied engineering in college, and that's when all my symptoms began. So I started getting low blood pressure, which, that's a more normal symptom. And then that evolved into passing out almost like once a week. And I'm a very high-strung type A type individual, and taking exams and things like that, I couldn't even see what I was doing. I had to tilt the exam just to start looking at it, and all these weird symptoms. So the reason I'm starting with this is because I'm explaining how all these weird symptoms just started amassing out of nowhere. And going from someone who I've been a runner, I've been a horseback rider, I was on my college's equestrian team, super active, I did half marathon in like 8th grade, always an active individual, to barely being able to have the energy to like move. I still did because I'm a very determined person, but all these things started happening early on in college, and I had no idea why. So my diet at the time was very much, I had some meat, had some plants, a good variety of everything. And I started seeing a bunch of doctors too during this time period. And they just told me, you have this, you have that. And none of these things that they were describing to me were root causes or getting to what was really going on. So it really culminated to me passing out in my apartment one day. I was alone, home alone, studying for an exam, and I just passed out. And that kind of fear of I was alone, like the fear that instilled in me finally convinced me to go to the ER, get some help now, not just an endocrinologist 2 months from now, because it's impossible to get into some of those doctors. And so luckily I did have some family around. They got me to the ER. All we got was a POTS diagnosis. And so I was like, okay, that's something, because it did make sense. It was true, but it was only like part of the puzzle, of course. Fast forwarding from that, I didn't want to just give up on what was going on. We just kept trying doctors, and eventually we had a doctor who was also a family friend at the time who listened to me a little bit more than some of the other doctors. And she got me in for a brain scan because of some of my neurological symptoms, and they found a low brain tumor. That, fast forwarding some more months, found out was just a coincidence because my symptoms did not actually go away after my brain surgery to remove the tumor. So then I was tirelessly like just digging into PubMed, digging into the research. Here's an engineer getting into all this health research. And I did have a laboratory science background as well. I did a lot of research at my university and still do. But even with that, I couldn't figure out what was wrong. And all of a sudden, something clicked in me. And I was like, every time I eat this, I feel bad. So let's just not eat this anymore. This is clearly not supporting me and my healing journey. And I didn't even know what I was trying to heal from at the time. And I was eating oatmeal every morning. That was like my standard breakfast, and a bunch of vegetables, a bunch of fruits. And I told my parents, I told my family, I told all my support group, I was just like, I'm going to switch over, like high protein diet. And it wasn't even that I wasn't eating enough protein at the time, because I was eating quite a bit, but I was like, it's time to start taking away some of these things that seem to be making my stomach upset and seem to be bringing on these dizzy spells. Because like I said, I was passing out all the time. My blood pressure was extremely low. And the first day I took away the oatmeal, I took away a lot of the other fruits and vegetables, and I just replaced it with so many more eggs. At the time, I loved eggs, tons of meat, salmon, you name it. It was super high protein. But that day was so eye-opening. It was the first day in probably 2 years I wasn't dizzy. I literally could see straight. And I was like, how is that even possible? And my first thought was, it's got to be a blood sugar thing, like a high blood sugar making you dizzy or something. But my blood sugar was fine. It was more related to the inflammation that food was bringing on in my body at the time. And I guess we'll fast forward to my Lyme diagnosis. I implemented more of a carnivore type diet before even figuring out what was wrong with me, because it just intuitively felt good. And finally, I was like, yeah, I do need to figure out what's going on, because it was keeping my symptoms at bay, but I still needed to get to the root cause. I did work with a great naturopathic doctor, actually down here in Florida, and we got the blood tests. We figured out it was Lyme, it was mold, both of them, of course, because they often go together, those biotoxin illnesses, and started healing from SIRS. I still eat largely carnivore. I do have some other things implemented as well, but man, that diet did save me for a good period of time. So that's my long drawn out story, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm just curious. POTS, postural orthostatic cardia syndrome, a lot of people get it from sitting to standing. They have issues with that. A lot of times it's a problem with regulating blood pressure. The tumor you had, pituitary adenoma, or what was it? Was it pituitary adenoma? I'm just guessing. I'm just trying to, that's a pretty common.
It was.
Okay. And so you had surgery to resect that. Were they just, it's there, we just might as well take it out? What was the justification for having brain surgery? Were they like, they think this is a real issue, or what was the deal?
Yeah. So at the time, and it's funny because I joke around now that I got a brain tumor for my 21st birthday, because I got the MRI on my birthday. But right when we took the scans to a brain surgeon and an endocrinologist, they were both concerned because some of my hormones were extremely off. And they thought that the pituitary adenoma was functional. They thought it was producing hormones, and they thought that was what was causing all my symptoms. They got me in. This was also during COVID, and they weren't really taking a whole lot. You're lucky to get in during that time. And they got me in within 2 weeks after my brain scan and got the tumor out. They went through my nose, an endonasal route. And it was like a 6-hour surgery. It was a pretty long ordeal. And I was in the ICU for a good bit of time after that too. And I did have to take time out of college to recover. And they kept telling me, encouraging me that my symptoms are going to go away, but since they're hormonal, they may take longer. So it may take a couple of months before I start feeling relief. And I was like, okay. And that initial few months, I was still recovering. I was, not to get too graphic, but there was so much drainage coming out of my nose, and I had a clean up 4 times a day and replace these bandages they put up my nose. And so that was in and of itself an ordeal. But then months later, I was like, my symptoms really aren't getting better. So that's when the research started again.
Yeah. Okay. And you said you were diagnosed with a Lyme disease. It seems to be one of these things that catch all. A lot of people that have these mysterious things end up with that or some kind of mold, and they go to various, I don't know, naturopaths or functional medicine doctors, and that's one of the ones they often find. The fatigue, like you said, you're passing out. What was that related to the POTS? Was that related to something else? What? I assume that stopped, right? It stopped since you changed your diet.
Yeah. It stopped with like the dizziness stopped with the diet change, but then it slowly crept on like a dull dizziness. It was like I was just walking in a fog ever since then. So it went down significantly, but it wasn't until I really went through the SIRS protocol that I started getting real relief from like the actual dizziness. The fainting, or the passing out, that went away with the diet change for sure. But yeah, I had some pretty high levels of inflammation, and my complement C4A was like 10 times the upper limit. So bringing that down, all my symptoms started coming down. And I think that the low blood pressure was really a result of my antidiuretic hormone being so off with my osmolality that they just didn't match up, which is, of course, a hallmark of that biotoxin illness. Because I couldn't keep water in. I would load the salt in, and the meat helped a lot. But before then, it was even worse. But after the diet change, loading with meat, loading with salt, loading with water, I still couldn't really retain the water too well. So I think that's the primary driver of that low blood pressure. So that did require going through the SIRS protocol to really start feeling some relief there.
Yeah, when you say SIRS, because some people may not be familiar with that term, chronic inflammatory response syndrome, and it's just a multi-system-wide diagnosis, and I think it's gotten a lot of play in integrative functional type practices. What were the totality of your symptoms that drove this SIRS diagnosis? And then you said the protocol, so maybe you can describe that as well.
Yeah, so the biggest one is the one I already hit, that passing out for me, that was crazy. And the low blood pressure, the dizziness, those all went together. Other symptoms, I'd never, ever in my life been one to have headaches. I got crazy headaches, crazy fatigue, of course, too. Nausea, that was weird. I'd never been one to even really have any symptoms. I've generally been a very healthy person. My dad, he's a chiropractor, nutritionist. Like, I grew up in a very healthy household. I'm very fortunate to have grown up in a healthy household. And then other symptoms, extreme thirst, going back to that ADH. And then let's see. Gosh, there were so many. The blurry vision. Suddenly I was like shifting my day. I was always like early to bed, early to rise. And then it was all of a sudden staying up because I finally got energy at 11 p.m. And I was like running off of stress hormones, basically. And then I would wake up and it'd be like into the morning, and that just wasn't normal for me. But yeah, so many different symptoms, truly. My throat, I felt like I had a chronic flu going on. Like, my throat was always burning, always coughing, runny nose. It felt literally like I had the flu for 3 years nonstop, added on to all that passing out. And then, yeah, going through the protocol now, it really started with step one of Dr. Shoemaker's protocol, of course, is getting out of the environment, the moldy environment. Because in my history, I had the mold and the Lyme. We needed to address the mold first from the way I was instructed. And that meant getting out of the environment. And that coincided with me actually moving to Florida. So I was lucky in that case because my old apartment had mold in it. but I didn't really realize that at the time because I didn't know the diagnosis at the time. And then upon moving to Florida, I started feeling a little bit better, but I didn't really know why. And then that's when the diagnosis happened. So I was like, okay, great. I've already done step 1. I've already moved out. And then step 2 is starting to get on a binder. And this is more of just the strict Shoemaker protocol. So that's when I started implementing. And that binder really just helps to get those biotoxins out of the body and avoid the recirculation of the toxins once they exit the liver, to bind them up, get them all the way out of the body. But that also, for me, needed a little bit of support. So my journey was a little bit different than just the strict Shoemaker protocol. I also implemented a lot of like nervous system support, and then just a lot of mindfulness and just encouraging that this is going to help, and calming my body down, and then decreasing the inflammation. That had to happen up front because my body just was not responding super well to the binder immediately. So I needed to take some of these kind of, I guess, baby steps into the protocol. So it was like high dose fish oil, even ginsenosides for the neuroinflammation. I know Dr. Andrew Heyman talks a lot about neuroinflammation, and even has a pretty unique test that assesses like the gene transcriptomics of SIRS. But anyways, getting back to the point, I had to take these baby steps and then implement the binder. And then after that, it was just a bunch of measuring my blood levels, checking on Marcons, which can get in the nasal passages with many individuals who have SIRS. And then, just keep assessing my blood levels, keep assessing the progress. And eventually everything started going down. I started feeling better. It's still a process, I won't lie, because every day is a process of taking care of your health. That's where I'm at right now. And I think towards the end is when I started really putting emphasis on gut health and even mitochondrial health, because I was like, it's time to not just feel better. It's time to like thrive. It's time to really get my life back. Yeah.
Okay. And so you're still, like you said, you're still in recovery, but you're maybe through the worst of it. Is that fair to say, you think?
Oh, yeah. Way through the worst of it. Right now, I'd say I'm just in more of a monitoring kind of stage where I'm like, I just want to be sure everything's still on the up and up. Everything's still going well. My gut, I'm still like tweaking things every now and then, making sure no SIBO or nothing pops up out of nowhere. So, yeah.
Yeah, when you talk about gut health, one way is just how do I feel? How does it function? Because you can have diarrhea, constipation, bloating, gas, pains, whatever, indigestion, you can assess that. Mitochondrial health is a little harder to assess. It's like, how do you know what your mitochondria are doing? It's hard to measure them for a way, other than just how much energy I have, perhaps, and things like that. You said you used the carnivore diet for a period of time and it helped. And so I guess maybe, what did you do? How long did it last? And then what are you doing these days?
Yeah. Gosh, I probably was like pretty strict carnivore. I took away the fruits and vegetables. No, I think I would have some berries every now and then, and maybe herbs and things like that. I wasn't like super duper strict, but because I felt so good, I'm the type of person that if it works, I'm going to do it. Like, and I did, I felt so good. And so I just kept doing it like a year and a half. And a lot of people would argue and be like, that's too long. You're going to damage your microbiome. But I felt good. And that's what mattered to me at the time. Now, because going through the SIRS protocol and really addressing some more of the root causes, I have expanded just a little bit on my diet. I'm still extremely meat-based, animal product-based. I don't necessarily do well with dairy. I don't really do dairy. I'm going to experiment with some goat milk, maybe, but that's for the future. But right now is lots of herbs incorporated, berries, of course, Even I do pretty well with pecans and some nuts, like macadamia nuts are great. Definitely olive oil. Yeah, maybe some squashes. Really, a lot of those low anti-nutrient vegetables, if any. Not anything with lectins or yeah, I don't really mess around with that too much. Even FODMAPs are still, I don't really want to mess around with those too much because I just don't feel super good on them, just in general. Right now, still tons of meat. For lunch today, I had a beef burger and a turkey burger and some other stuff too, a little salad with that. But yeah, so I guess arugula. As you can see, I do incorporate some other things now, but still really large into the meat and animal-based fats.
Obviously, probably not including a lot of processed foods, starches, grains, things like that are probably off the table. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, they just make me feel horrible.
Yeah, a lot of people are in that boat. So you said Shoemaker. I'm not familiar with Dr. Shoemaker, but he has a protocol for SIRS. And does he have a dietary regimen that he has with that? And is it anti-carnivore, pro-carnivore, or a little bit of both, or what is it like?
Yes, his specific dietary recommendations were related to the elevated MMP9 levels that SIRS patients have. He recommended low amylose diet. Carnivore matches that. There's no starch in that because the amylose would raise the MMP9 and then raise the inflammation and just keep it going. That was his main diet recommendation. A lot of other people have expanded on that and said, you want to do low amylose, low mold, so like moldy nuts, of course, and low histamine diets. And in some cases, the histamine portion would eliminate like certain cured meats and some of the carnivore diet. But all in all, if you combine all three of those diets, you're going to feel good on the carnivore diet because you're taking out starch, you're taking out a lot of the high histamine foods, which are a ton of vegetables, and fermented foods are super high in histamine. And then the mold, you're taking out pretty much almost every nut, and then a bunch of like hard cheeses and things like that. So you're left with meat, fish, and maybe eggs if you tolerate them. So yeah, I would say all in all, the SIRS diet really could be a carnivore diet, truly.
Yeah, it's interesting to see all these different dietary protocols, whether it's AIP protocol or SIRS diet. Ultimately, carnivore covers all. It eliminates everything you're supposed to eliminate. And the MMP9 or the matrix metalloprotease 9 is associated also with arthritis, metabolic syndromes, COPD, coronary artery disease. So it's one of those things, a general systemic marker for inflammation. Interesting that happens. And did you have any, like I said, you noticed an improvement in your general health? Was there any negatives when you transitioned to carnivore or what you do now? Is your gut health pretty good? Has it all been good or has there been some bad associated with it?
All in all, I don't know any other diet that can make me feel as good as I feel right now. If you want to get into the nitty-gritty of things, maybe there are certain meats that make me feel better than others, or maybe if I'm not, and I guess you could add in that sometimes if I eat just pure meat, I don't feel as well as if I eat the meat and maybe a little bit of arugula or a little bit of some type of fat, olive oil. And the best feeling I get is usually when the fat is combined with the animal protein. So like I'm eating more of the fatty meats instead of just like adding in an extra source of fat, like an oil or something. That makes me feel better. So truly, I can't complain because I don't know another diet that could supersede what the carnivore diet does.
Yeah, so maybe if you could have some mammoth meat or something like that might be optimal. It's funny because it looks like, if you look back anthropologically into the evolutionary history of humans, and it looks like we ate a lot of mammoth at least some parts of our history, and that would have been a very fatty, we know it's very fatty. So that's why we often maybe gravitate towards fattier cuts of meat, despite the warnings of saturated fat and cholesterol and all that stuff. It's still, we're intrinsically drawn to that. And I think that's maybe one of the reasons for that. And it could be that is largely what our natural food is. But a lot of people argue about that. But interesting. Was it Dr. Shoemaker was the guy you actually saw, or is it just somebody who follows his protocol?
Just someone who follows his protocol. He's got like a certification.
I see.
Yeah.
I see. And did you tell them you're on mostly a carnivore diet, and did they have any problems with that if you did?
Actually, the first doctor I went to, I explained my diet, and I approached it from more of a whole foods type standpoint, because I wasn't opposed to eating something like arugula, or I am opposed to eating certain lectin and goitrogen. That's a different story. There are certain hard, fast rules that I'm just like, I'm not gonna eat a high FODMAP apple or something that's not gonna make me feel good. But the way I explained it to some of the doctors was, I eat very whole foods based. I eat a lot of meat, and they'll look at me, and typically a lot of the doctors will be like, oh, great. Because I'm pretty tiny. I'm a pretty tiny girl. And the first thought is they're like, oh, she's a vegan. And I'm not a vegan, I promise.
Did you ever like dabble with that or consider it? Because you are the demographic. Most vegans are female and often young females. That's you look at vegans, females outnumber males like 4 or 5 to 1, and it's often younger girls, and they do it for a while and then they get sick and stop. But did you ever think about doing vegan as you got sick over the years?
In high school, my sister actually became vegan. I have 2 older sisters, and one of them became vegan for the animal reasons and everything. And so I was like, oh, maybe I should do that. Because, you look up to your siblings and everything. But I don't know. I was like, I don't really, this sounds horrible, but I was like, I don't really care. I would rather nourish myself with what I need to nourish myself with. And I never really thought about it. It was always like a question of what makes me feel good and what doesn't make me feel good. Because if something made me feel like bloated, I was like, why would I do a diet that's even heavier in those foods? So when it came down to deciding what should I eat to feel better, I was like, it's just a no-brainer at that point. So I don't really think I ever wanted to really go vegan.
Is your sister still doing that? Just out of curiosity?
No.
She said no. Okay.
No. No. And actually, my dad, being a chiropractor and nutritionist, he wasn't a fan of that. And he is a bodybuilder. He's a pro boxer at one time. He likes meat. He eats meat. And he was always an advocate for protein in the household growing up. My mom cooked meals every single night. We ate out sometimes. We did enjoy ourselves, but it was largely like at home cooked meals, and there was a protein in every meal. So that didn't last long for her.
And I guess your dad being a chiropractic physician, did he weigh in on any of your conditions or give you any thoughts on that? Or is he concerned about you doing a mostly carnivore diet now?
At the beginning, I think we were all so just baffled with the symptoms, because they were like you said, they were very multi-system, having these neurological symptoms, these gastrointestinal symptoms, so many different things that we were like, whatever we can do just to feel better at this point. So I think that's what boat he was in. He just wanted me to feel better. And if meat was doing that, so be it. He honestly, he never really brought up any kind of qualms with increasing my meat or kind of getting more into the carnivore realm. It was really the only time he was really concerned was when my sister actually went vegan, and he was wanting that to change. But honestly, I don't think he questioned the carnivore too much.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. What do you like? You said you're a small. I can't tell from the screen, but you look like you might be smaller. But how much do you eat a day now? What is it? How big are you, if you don't mind sharing that? And how much do you eat to keep full?
Yeah, I can eat a lot, especially when I am eating more just meat, because going back to the thirst issue, I would drink, and I still do drink a lot of water excessively because that ADH does take longer to fully regulate. And I would be drinking like 2 liters of water at every meal. And that wasn't because I was like trying to fill up or anything. And I did get accused of, oh, she's just trying to like drink water so she's not as hungry. And I was like, no, I'm thirsty, man. I had to. And it would give me stomach pain trying to eat when I had that much water in me. And that was a huge issue at the beginning because it was hard to get the food in. It really was. And I've never been one to be like, oh, I'm scared to eat. No, I just couldn't. The pain was horrible for so long. But now I've got different modalities. Salt, of course, got to have the salt, got to have the water. But now when I eat certain foods, I'm able to eat more and get more calories because my stomach's not upset. Especially when I'm eating the meat, I can get what I need to get. In a normal day, I'm eating beef, turkey, chicken, and sometimes this is all in the same day. I'll eat servings of all these different meats in the same day. Salmon, I love salmon. I eat a lot of calorie-dense foods to make sure I get what I need to get, like lots of ghee, because ghee does work pretty well with me. Lots of macadamia nuts do work well with me too, so I do a lot of those. But yeah, like I said, just a lot of calorie-dense stuff seems to help me because I'm not adding so much bulk to my system to where number one, my stomach's upset, and number two, I'm so full off of that, I can't even fit anything else because I am drinking so much water. So that's probably about like my day-to-day.
You had mentioned earlier as a young kid, half marathon, equestrian, athletics. Now that you've changed diet to either a carnivore or a very meat-based diet, are you able to engage in that stuff anymore? Or how do you feel? Do you feel like you're stronger, or how do you deal with that stuff?
Oh gosh, the day I switched to, because it was a day. I know some people might drift into the carnivore diet, but for me, I was like, I'm just doing it. I'm just going to try it. And the day I switched, because I was still running or doing some form of exercise like almost every day. And the day I switched, I was like, whoa, I felt great. And there's always that argument that's like, if you're doing endurance training, especially as a runner, you need the carbs. I was great on the carnivore diet, and everybody is certainly different. And I totally acknowledge that. But for me, carnivore diet was better than the carbs as far as training goes and maximizing the way I felt at the gym. So yeah.
Yeah, so it's been helpful for you as well. How about, did you notice any sort of cognitive or mental health benefits from changing diet?
Yeah. The brain fog correlated with the vision issues and the dizziness. And like I said, that first day, it drastically reduced my dizziness. And that corresponded with a drastic reduction in brain fog. I was, again, as an engineer and studying, it's not the easiest program to get into and study in your undergrad career. But after clearing some stuff up, it was fine. And I was always like, I guess, straight A kid, but it was substantially easier. I was putting so few hours in. I remember I was thinking to myself, I was like, why do I have all this extra time? And I was like, because it was taking me like 5 hours to do what I can now do in 1 hour as far as getting my schoolwork done. So yeah, great cognitive benefits.
And you said engineer. Have you picked a particular discipline? Engineering, civil, mechanical, electrical. What kind of engineering are you studying?
Yeah, so I have a degree in mechanical, and then I did a lot of research, laboratory research in some chemistry fields as well.
Okay, yeah, my college roommate was a mechanical engineer, and I remember the poor guy was never he never got out of his chair because he was always studying with his drafting board. And I would go out.
Yeah.
I'd go out for the day, and he'd still be there when I came back. So it's a hard. And I was a biology major, but it was a hard field for sure. And it's still mostly male. Is that still the case? Yeah, I remember there was only a handful of girls that were going to engineer. That was when I was in school. That was early 1990s, late 1980s. Holy cow, getting old. So as far as what are your plans from now? You've gotten most of your health back? Do you have any plans on what you'd like to do as far as career, maybe goals, health-wise, athletic-wise, or things like that?
Yeah, this took a big toll on my life for sure, because I wrote a book on my journey and a bunch of I call them gut healing strategies or biohacks, but really they're just a set of tools that I needed and that helped me get through this process and support my gut health so that I could eat, because you're not going to heal from SIRS if you don't have the nutrients to eat. That book right now, I wrote a lot about the carnivore diet in that book because it was one of those game changers for me. I've got some peptides in the book and things like that, but I'm putting a lot of effort into that book right now because it is such a passion for me. And it also makes me feel good to know that I can pull from a tool when I need it. I've got BPC 157 in the book. If I feel like I need it one time, sure, pull from the book. But yeah, so that's what my project is right now.
Very nice. Okay. So that should be interesting to keep you busy for a while. And I'm curious, I assume you still talk to your formerly vegan sister. Does she have any thoughts on you now being mostly carnivorous?
I think they just laugh at me just because they know how much research I do. They make fun of me in that way, and they don't question almost anything I do. And I love them to death, both my sisters. One of my sisters she's in residency. She's a pediatrician, going to go into pediatrics. So she's got like a medical background as well. But they know I just research to death, and they know my journey. I think that's also a big point. They saw me just so depressed. When you're not feeling good, you're not happy, you're not smiling, because you're not feeling good. And I was always like that. I was always like the class clown of the family, in a sense. Always like trying to make people smile and laugh in my family. And my sisters just seeing me not feel that way, they don't question anything I do anymore because they're just glad to really have their sister back. And I'm glad to be back.
Yeah, that's good for you. And because in theory, you might have had an unnecessary brain surgery. A lot of times those pituitary adenomas don't do anything. They just sit there and you can leave them alone. In retrospect, if you could do it all over again, and we never can, but if you could, maybe someone's in a similar situation, how would you tell them or what would you do? What would you tell yourself in retrospect?
The first thing I would tell myself would be listen to yourself, because I am very intuitive and I'm very hardworking and I research hard. But if a doctor tells me, no, I wouldn't look at that. I'm going to trust that. Or back then I fully trusted it because honestly, I never went to the doctor growing up because my dad. So it was always like, if you got a cold, just do this. If you do that. I was always the child who didn't have those regular doctor checkups or anything. So the first time really going to doctors was in college when I had all these symptoms. And so when they told me, no, I don't think it's this, or I think you just have this and that's your problem, I just fully believed it. And I think that was just my first kind of mistake, was just putting so much trust into everybody except myself and trusting that everybody knew my body better than I knew my body. And if I had trusted myself a little bit earlier and pushed and just been a little pushy and not so much of a people pleaser, I would have probably gotten to the answer faster. So in retrospect, looking back, that's the first thing I would have told myself. Trust yourself. If you have an idea, ask the doctor to get that blood work. Look into stealth infections. Look into some of these underlying complement proteins that signify inflammation that aren't typically addressed by a standard blood panel. And of course, test, don't guess, and work with your medical provider and just ask for some tests and be a little bit more proactive and not just rely on them to give you a blood test order. Because that's step one, is you got to figure out what's going on. And some people spend thousands of dollars. I know we spent quite a lot of money trying to get a diagnosis and quite a lot of money on that brain surgery because we thought that was the issue. But yeah, just get the blood work and test. If you can get one panel and test almost everything, all these different inflammatory markers that aren't typically tested, that's gold. That will send you in the right direction. Yeah. So get to the underlying thing. And a lot of people might think SIBO or some gut infection is the underlying thing. And it not always is. Sometimes there's something even deeper than that, like Lyme or mold or, some other infection, Epstein-Barr, whatever it is, that is keeping your body in a state of inflammation. And if your body is so inflamed, the gut is going to have a really difficult time healing. That would be my advice to myself going back in time.
Okay. Yeah. It's like I said, hindsight is always 20/20 in many cases. I guess you can always say that. So it's hard to say for sure. Do you find that it's challenging to do the diet you're doing? Do you find it hard to do? Or do you feel like you're sacrificing a lot? Or do you feel it's just the health is worth it? Or do you literally feel deprived at times?
Because there were times I'm like, oh, I'd like to eat that. But if I do feel that way, I'll try it. I'll try and eat it. And if it makes me feel bad, I'm like, that's not worth it. And if it doesn't, for example, I know macadamia nuts. Those were one of the first nuts I introduced. They tend to be a little less reactive than especially something like almonds with all those lectins and stuff like that. But I was like, I'd like to have some of those. And so I went for it. I started really slow. It was like one nut a day until I was like, oh, this is okay. I can do this. So if I do feel like I want something, I will think about it and be like, yeah, I think that's reasonable. And I don't think that will make me feel bad. And let's test it out. But all in all, I don't. The majority of the time, I really don't feel deprived. The first time I ate a beef burger, I was like, oh, this is good. Because I hadn't had one in a while, because I was just largely like still eating the oatmeal, still eating all the other super high fiber foods. And if I did eat meat at that time, it was pretty lean meat. So I wasn't necessarily eating like a beef burger or anything like that. But when I did, I was like, oh, this reminds me of like grilling out in my childhood. This is fun. Like, I love this. And so, no, it's not depriving. If you do it in the correct way, you will feel good, not deprived. And there are so many options too. Like it's really not as narrow as it might seem. Like it might seem like it's just meat and animal products. It's really not. There are so many different options, and variety isn't really, it's not a question. Like there's so many options out there. So I guess the long answer to your question is I don't feel too deprived at all.
Of all the things you had in your sort of journey from being very sick and passing out and not knowing what's going on to eventual diagnosis and treatments, what has been made the most impact? You mentioned cholestyramine, some other Sears protocol, dietary shifts. Could you like rank order those and what seemed to make the biggest difference for you?
Yeah. And that's a fully loaded question, because every time I found research, I was like, this is it. I was like, oh, it's ozone therapy, or oh, it's hyperbaric, or it's this, it's that, it's cholestyramine. At the beginning, it was all of it. I needed everything. I needed the mental work the nervous system calming. I needed the hyperbarics did help. The cholestyramine felt horrible at the beginning. I got an upregulation of a bunch of symptoms. But then after about a few weeks, it was like, oh, wow, I think I'm starting to like actually feel like myself just a little bit, which was odd because that hadn't happened in a long time. And then the diet was so fast changing. I'd say that's one of the quickest fixes, like just eliminating a lot of those super carby, anti-nutrient filled foods. You just get this wave of energy, this wave of clarity, dizziness goes away. It was overnight. So that was a huge game changer. Aside from those things though, peptides, I found a lot of success with peptides, and just they're not necessarily they're not what you want to lean on, I think, in my opinion, totally, because that's not necessarily the best way to heal, in my opinion. But they were definitely a crutch for a good period of time. And sometimes I feel like you need something like that to just get you going, to just help you through the protocol, to get you to where you need to be so that you can actually fully heal. Yeah, the peptides, KPV, BPC 157, they were game changers for sure.
Yeah, and obviously those things you have to acquire those. I don't know how expensive they are, but at least with diet, most people have access to it. Pretty much everyone can change their diet. That might be one of the places you start with, is with diet and see what you get out of that. And then if you need further work, you can branch out to those things. I think that makes sense to me. Social media, do you do that? Or is that part of that? Are you like saying, hey, this is what happened to me? And a lot of people are now putting everything. It used to be, there was this thing, you may not remember, there used to be a movie called The Truman Show. And it was about this guy, Jim Carrey played the actor. And he was like, his whole life was on screen and everybody thought this is crazy. And now pretty much everybody's on Truman Show now, myself included. Everything's on social media, which arguably is a bad thing. But are you on social media about this stuff? And if so, how's that going? Are you getting a lot of negative reaction, good reaction? What's the thought?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. At the meat of my journey, or when I was tackling my biggest issues, really, I did not post. I just needed all the time for myself. I didn't document my journey. I didn't do anything like that. I still had a private Instagram account at the time, and just my friends, school friends, family, stuff like that. I was in the ICU posting so everyone could see I was okay and everything after the brain surgery. But after that, when symptoms came back, I was like, or really never left. I did not post. I ghosted social media. And then when I started feeling better and I started feeling like I got a grasp on things and that I was getting my life back, I shifted from that private Instagram and I did start a new one, the Synthesis of Wellness. So it's just at Synthesis of Wellness. And on that one, I don't really focus too much on the negatives of my journey, or really my journey specifically. I try and just post things that helped rather than just focusing on myself, if that makes sense. I actually I am an affiliate with Carnivore snacks, so I share about them sometimes. But as far as hate or negative comments, stuff like that, I try and keep so much of my content this may not work for everyone, but here's what the research says, and here's the document to back that up. You can't argue when you got the source right there or the facts just laid out. I try and just approach it from that standpoint, just to try and avoid as much as that as possible. But all in all, I don't sweat it because everybody's got an opinion. And if it's in the research and if it works, you can't argue with that. So in the carnivore diet works, it's in the research. You can't argue with it.
Well,
you can say hateful comments, but yeah.
I mean, there's people who argue all the time, but I agree, and results speak for themselves in many cases. And so you can't, for that individual, you can't tell me I didn't get healthier.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Anyway, do you mind? You said what was the name of your social media? You said something, the Spectrum of Wellness or something like that. I can't remember.
Yeah, it's at Synthesis of
Synthesis
Wellness.
of Wellness. Okay, Synthesis of Wellness. All right. We are just out of time at this point, Chloe. Thank you for sharing your sort of story, your journey, and I wish you continued success. And I guess you're finishing up schooling and then onto a career and all that great stuff. And I'd love to see you back.
I'm graduated.
Oh, good. Okay. So you're back. Are you working now then? You're working?
Yeah.
Okay. Good for you. Awesome. All right, guys. We'll see everybody else tomorrow. Thanks, Chloe. Bye-bye.